Hello everyone and welcome to this video which is in our Reengineering the Chess Classics series. I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler and we're taking a look at another game won by Sergio Mariotti, this time against the great Alexander Beliavsky in Leningrad 1977. Was pointed to this game, apparently made quite a stir when Mariotti beat Beliavsky. It's quite an interesting game, actually. It's one of those funny games where it looks like, actually it kind of looks like Mariotti was kind of playing for a draw, just playing for equality. And Beliavsky lost track, actually, of how dangerous his position could become and lost the game. I've lost games like this too as black, where, you know, my opponent's, I suppose, quiet play has sort of made me forget really that danger still exists in lots of different positions, and and then you end up losing a game that disappoints you terribly because you feel you weren't in danger and yet you managed to hurt yourself somehow. But it's very, very interesting to see this, so let's have a little look. So d4, knight f6, and then bishop g5 from Mariotti, the Tromp. I've been looking at a recent book by Richard Palliser, English international master, very good author, also a helper of Gawain Jones, English grandmaster, very good theoretician, and very good book on this. So interesting to see Mariotti actually playing the move order that Palliser recommends, which is bishop g5 and then knight d2s. I mean, what's the idea of the Trompovsky? You sort of think really that, well, surely it's to take the knight on f6, but you know, the problem with playing moves like bishop takes f6 is that black gets the opportunity to strike at the center with e5, c5. Very, very dangerous indeed, in actual fact. There's a great game, Miles' Conquest, which served as a sort of a model for me. The way that Stewart played that was really fantastic. And I've won some games with black in this type of position. And I think I saw that c4, e5 is becoming popular as well. And I actually played this in a blitz game against English international master Byron Jacobs some while back. It was a novelty, but I don't play very often, so might as well use it in blitz. And this turned out to be very strong. I'm just trying to think what my idea was. And bishop b4 check was possible. You could even play like an Albin counter gambit with d4 and just say, let's go, boys. So actually, you know, what white tends to do is actually just leave the bishop on g5 there, just as a long-term irritation. I might take on f6 and go for the structural option, or I might just leave it there and have a pin later. And I think that makes the Trompovsky, pardon me, that makes the Trompovsky, just that little bit more tricky, because of course you can always transpose back into some sort of Queen's Gambit line with c4 at some stage, and knight c3 and the Queen's Gambit decline, something like that. So there are always these possibilities as well. Just shows how openings become more sophisticated as time goes by. So knight d2 played, and then Beliavsky played knight bd7, which is quite interesting. I think I've played something very similar to that myself as black a very long time ago against Julian Hodgson, I think. The engine actually wants you to play c5, obviously not afraid of the exchange on f6, and after e3 play queen b6 and attack these pawns. And this is one of the main lines. The engine doesn't want to take on b2, not yet, but he's threatening d4. So white end up having to play knight b3 maybe, just to defend the d4 pawn and shield the b2 pawn. Black plays bishop f5, and it's sort of fine for black. But I mean, there's plenty of ways for playing for black, but that's one of that's the engine main recommendation. But knight bd7 is quite interesting there as well. Defending the knight on f6 and also thinking about a pretty quick e5. Does mean, however, that c5 is going to be less powerful somehow with a knight on d7 rather than c6. On the other hand, if you're planning to play b6 and bishop b7, this is a very harmonious and logical way of putting the knight somehow. The knight protects the other knight, and leaves the long diagonal free for the bishop. So knight f3 was played, h6 here from Beliavsky. Yeah, why not? Sort of make use of the fact that there's no hope of getting double pawns, just to get that future little escape square for your king on the king side later. Actually, the engines were kind of interested in bishop f4, which may seem a little bit odd, but the idea is that having h6 in, if you're later going to put a knight on e5, that can be interesting somehow, because with the knight on e5 and black having played h6, the g6 square is a little bit weaker. So you can't chase the knight away with f6, because then we move into g6. You see those ideas in the Queen's Gambit declined as well. But yeah, I mean, quite interesting. Always worth a try. I mean, of course, with white, these lines in principle are not very, very dangerous, but the potential for confusion and tricking black somehow, that's what you're playing for as well. But Mariotti played it very sensibly, and actually the game sort of meanders on in a very quiet fashion here. Well, kind of quiet. Mariotti played the move bishop d3, which is quite provocative. I mean, normally you play, c3 first and then bishop d3, but bishop d3, and Mariotti's just sort of tempting Beliavsky. Do you want to play c4? And what are the pluses and the minuses? Well, I mean, c4 gains a tempo and gains queenside space. On the other hand, you've no longer got pressure against the white centre, so that might give white an opportunity to play something like e4 more easily. But I mean, actually, the engines are unbelievably keen on these sort of plans. They don't care about this central tension. They think that you've got plenty of time here and plenty of power to gain space on the queen side and put pressure on white's position that way. And yeah, I mean, it looks quite decent somehow, but it's a risky thing for humans to choose something like that. Even more shockingly, though, that after bishop e7, c3, I was sort of looking a little bit puzzled when I saw this, because the engines, both Torch and Stockfish, are recommending this move, which, if you showed me this, again, I would say beginner's mistake. This is clearly the move of somebody who hasn't understood that, you've got to keep tension on the white centre as long as possible, because if you release the tension with a move like c4, then white is able to break in the centre more easily. There's nothing to stop him, no restraint on the centre. White can break through easily. It's a free kingside attack, basically free activity, probably clear advantage to winning for white. That would be my feeling. And then of course you see the engine saying, well, you should do this, and black's slightly better. So that is a slightly shocking thing. Definitely something I'm going to be having a look at to try and understand properly. I'll probably write an article or maybe do a video on it sometime. I mean, the key point is that the engines don't feel that e4 is particularly dangerous. There are exchanges happening, and then black's just still got a space advantage. And in the meantime, I mean, you're trying to get in these lines and just undermine the white queen side, and you're just claiming that you're faster and that there's nothing particularly dangerous happening on the king side. I mean, when the engines do it, it looks very, very easy and very clear. When you try and do it yourself, you feel danger, and you have that feeling of I wish I hadn't committed myself so early to this sort of plan. It's definitely very, very interesting, but it is quite funny to see, because this was really a typical error in the sort of the 1860s, 70s, 80s. Even strong players were releasing tension too soon, and then they sort of learned that it's good to keep the tension, keep pressure on the opponent's centre, because then it makes it harder for him to attack. And now the engines are, well, presumably, just starting to discover more and more possibilities where you say, no, I can close the centre, I can go for a queenside push here, and you don't have anything particularly dangerous against me. But yeah, they're quite difficult positions for humans to handle. So yeah, do be careful if ever you want to follow that example. So castles, and then b6, c4 still recommended. I was sort of thinking surely this won't be recommended. Maybe castling kingside too early is going to worry the engines, but no, they still think bishop c2 b5 is pretty good here. So yeah, pretty interesting. But I think in order to understand it properly, you've got to see what the margins are really. How easy is it to go wrong with black? So that's what I'm going to try and investigate, and well, hopefully that can be some sort of interesting article or video sometime. I like those things somehow. I mean, I do like when my own knowledge is challenged, and then trying to work out, from the engines, okay, and what are the subtleties to it? Because sometimes engines recommend things, and they are actually true, but the subtleties are so big, are so important, and just a small thing, and you're going from better to worse. Yeah, I mean that's the things that are important to understand. But b6 played by Beliavsky, and Mariotti just played quietly queen c2. I mean, it's interesting to see that after e4, the engine's even just thinking that black's just a little bit better in this position. Don't really understand that, but yeah, in any case, not at all worse. So yeah, the engine's just clearly not very impressed in any sort of way with white's central play. But yeah, Mariotti did something rather un-Mariottish, really, I suppose. He just went for the exchange of pieces and played queen e2, bishop a6. I mean, in general, the exchange of bishops for white is not an amazing thing for him to achieve. I mean, you've got your pawns on dark squares here. So exchanging the light squared bishop, it does sort of weaken your control of the squares around it. On the other hand, the bishop's outside the pawn chain. So, it's not like if you had a bishop on c1, this would be extremely, really, but with the bishop on h4 it's fine. But yeah, you can't really say that that white's gaining more from this exchange than black, really. So it's just much of a muchness, really. I mean, that bishop was blocked by a pawn, but it's also preventing e4, and it's placed harmoniously. So it's just one of those much of a muchness things. I think the engines tend to feel that that if this is favouring anyone, it's favouring black somehow. But yeah, I mean, the evaluations are not particularly scary either way. I mean, the engines are really thinking of, move that queen back and then play c4 and swap off all these pawns and equalise completely. Mariotti played the move a4, doesn't ruin anything. Maybe looking for a5, maybe looking just to hold back the pawn on b5. You can still always go back to a plan with c4, so, it's not messing anything up here. c4 from Beliavsky, I think... this is Beliavsky definitely playing for an advantage here, because he's trying to stop the queen from getting back. He's stopping this plan with c4, and he's going to try and force the exchange of queens and then play on the queen side. So quite interesting there. The engines were looking at bishop d6 rather, just as a nice solid plan there. But again, nothing particularly amazing to be said about it. Bishop g3 from Mariotti, and I would say that probably bishop d6 would be the most sensible move. Yeah, I mean, I can understand why Beliavsky played queen c8. I mean, I think Beliavsky was thinking very much about playing positively here, and he was sort of thinking, oh God, if I swap off the bishops like this, there'll be b3 as well, and c4 will come in, nothing much is going to be happening here. So you understand why he wants to keep it on. The only thing is that, this bishop obviously is cutting across the black position, which makes it just a little bit more awkward for black to, to really get some queenside counterplay going somehow. But, the engines still think that if anyone's a little bit better, then black's a little bit better here, but yeah, possibilities to expand on the queen side. Maybe this chain can become a bit weak somehow. But Mariotti keeps on exchanging off pieces and does it pretty well, really. He played knight e5. And now I think that for me, this is where Beliavsky starts to go a little bit wrong. I think the engines, only see that much later somehow. But I do think that it's around here that the Beliavsky gets it really conceptually quite wrong. I mean, the engines are just saying, nice and quiet here. King f8, knight d7. Just nice and quiet and not really doing that much, slowly expanding. But, the engines don't really think there's that much to it. But, I think you just notice a few things just in general. A very slow build up, not at all rushing with playing a move like b5. And also another interesting moment as well there, which is worth mentioning. After bishop e5, knight d7, not allowing the bishop to be exchanged for the knight. So, and to be honest, this looks pretty sensible to me for black. There's no rush. White's not going to be able to do anything particular to you. So, maybe, with all this maneuvering, around here, you might be able to somehow get this bishop on h2 blocked off so that you get the b file for black, that sort of thing. So, okay, that's what the engines are thinking. What Beliavsky did was he took, and then played a6. And, Mariotti took the opportunity here, played a good move, I think, which was to take on f6 here, takes, and then play the move e4. For the engines, it doesn't really make much difference. They think this is still equal, and there's plenty of other lines that are also equal. But I think from a human perspective, this is quite important. Why is that? It's just that human players, I think certainly compared to engines, have a great difficulty in playing accurately for long periods of time. And what this position contains in it is the future idea that e takes d5, e takes d5, followed by a knight coming to e3. And there's no good way for black to protect d5 easily with a minor piece. That's just simply impossible. So you're going to have to defend it either with a king or with a rook. And of course, if you're having to defend it with a rook, that's, well, the seeds of disaster are in there really, because you're going to have a one of your heaviest pieces left over defending a little pawn, and well, there might be some possibilities then for white to invade with his two major pieces. Now, I mean, what the engines see is they see plenty of specific ideas for getting this bishop active. In particular, you're looking at this bishop and you're thinking this bishop is just never going to get active at all. It's just being just biting on granite. But the engines find all sorts of interesting ways either to fight against the knight coming to e3 or to activate the bishop to attack these pawns in actual fact. But you've really got to think that way, because what actually happens is that Beliavsky sort of sleepwalks his way really through the rest of the game somehow, and never really finds a concrete way to get the bishop active, and then he just ends up losing without any hope whatsoever. And that's what I mean by, humans find it difficult to play accurately, because of course the engines are spotting every single moment when the bishop has to get active, and finding all sorts of plans difficult for humans. So, I mean, simply the very best move would have been to play knight d7 and avoid this somehow. But I think that, Beliavsky was not quite, had switched off a little bit, sort of assumed, well, the opponent's playing, without ambition, so that means there is no danger. But that's never 100% true. And again, it's a psychological trap I've fallen into many times. It's not, and especially these sort of exchanges, very easy to underestimate. Just the exchange of a bishop for a knight. How bad can it be? But it can turn out quite bad. So Beliavsky played b5, and actually, here already, there's something very interesting that the engines are suggesting here. Engines were suggesting rook cb8. What could the idea be of that? Well, the idea is that after something like a takes b5, throwing in a little bishop g5 there just to hit the knight on d2. Knight f3 and then rook takes b5. That's the idea. Rook takes b5. The engines don't want to recapture with the a pawn. They want to recapture with the rook on b5 in order to be able to attack b2, because if you win b2, then c3 becomes weak after that. And I mean, just notice the position of the bishop on g5. If the knight went back to f1, the knight can't go to e3 first of all, it will get exchanged, and the bishop's also aiming for c1 to attack b2, or even at some stage d2 to attack c3. So yeah, I mean it's beautiful, right? I mean, but it's just the difference, that engines often show between just a kind of a not very switched on approach, it happens in practical games there, and not a big criticism of Beliavsky, but it just happens. And then this incredibly concrete approach where you're saying, okay, this knight is better than this bishop, but I need to get counterplay. This is the point I need to get counterplay, so I want an open b file. I'll accept a slightly worse structure here just in order concretely to attack this pawn on b2. And all of a sudden, your position's completely fine and there's no danger. So b5 was played, and Mariotti took the opportunity just to exchange. I think he, actually, instead of a takes b5, the engine, one of the engine suggestions is a5, just to be able to play rook cb8 and take on b5. It's a bit odd in that way, and it would be an odd way of doing it, but yeah, still very interesting somehow. It was a takes d5 there, a5, a4, rook b8, rook b5. Similar sort of thing again. So a takes b5, takes, rook e1, and now the engines are sort of saying any tiny advantages that are coming, they're on white, they're for white. And why is that? Simply this plan of knight f1 to e3. And of course, you can play a bishop to g5, but that's not to stop the knight coming round f1 to e3, but that's not a long-term thing. You can get driven away by g3, h4, g3, f4. So yeah, you can't really rely on that working. What the engines did seem to do is they seem to like the idea of white playing a move like f4, for example, opening up the second rank. But so b4, knight f1. And then Beliavsky played the move rook ab8 there. Now, I mean the engines here getting quite concrete in what they're doing. For example, rook cb8 is what one of the engines was looking at. Knight e3. And then the move bishop g5. So we're not even defending this pawn, but the idea is takes, we take on c3, takes, bc3, we go bishop d2, and we go rook a3. And we're just going to grab this pawn back by force. Very concrete approach there. And not just thinking, oh, okay, I've got that pawn is being attacked. I've got to defend it, but looking for counterplay and getting that bishop on g5 active. So again, impressive stuff. I mean, you can really learn a lot about. If you've ever lost a game like this where you thought, I don't know what I did wrong. It was a quiet opening, and I didn't manage to do anything. Then, I mean, think of this game and then look at that game again, because I think this can really say an awful lot somehow. So rook b5 was played by black. g3. I mean, looking at my two engines, Torch was starting to get more interested for white. Stockfish was still at 0.00. But now, actually, there's a big moment here, because the engines here were really looking for a specific plan here, which is pretty interesting somehow. So after g3, the engines were looking at playing rook cb8, then let's just say a move like king g2. They go bishop g5, hitting the knight on e3, threatening to exchange it, so we go f4 to block that. Bishop d8. You notice now that the second rank has been opened, so if the rook emerges here, it'll be good. And after rook a7, one of the ideas that the engines had was to play this move, bishop a5. So you've just moved this bishop from f6 over to a5, helping to attack the pawn on c3. I hadn't seen that particularly either. Another idea was rook a5 here. Again, not looking then to protect the pawn on d7, but simply looking to attack the chain. So you play king h3. I go bishop a5 here, and then I'm going to go rook b2, and I'm along the rank here, even looking at the white king, and I'm attacking all these pawns here as well. And the likelihood is that all these 3 pawns of blacks on the queen side will get exchanged for all 3 of whites. Incredibly powerful idea, this somehow, right? This bishop d8, but it's one of those things we often talk about, that the engines, it's still 0.00 for Stockfish, but a small thing, and suddenly the whole position changes. So that just means that you haven't been playing it accurately for a while, and you've been putting yourself into danger, because after h5 the engine evaluation absolutely jumps, because white plays the move h4 and black's no longer got the move bishop g5. And the funny thing is that if you try and play bishop d8 to try and now and move your bishop round to a5, white plays knight f5, and well, this is a very irritating thing. We're threatening rook e8 check, we're threatening knight d6, forking the 2 rooks, and if you played the bishop to a5, I mean knight d6 would work, also knight e7 as well. So basically, you don't have your plan anymore. So you've got to do something about it. Now, I mean, Torch was at over +1. Stockfish still saying it's okay, don't worry, 0.7, I can hold it for you. But yeah, it's going to require a bit more effort here. I mean, Stockfish was looking at playing rook e8, just with the idea then of playing bishop d8 to a5 at some stage. So that's one idea. Rook d8 was played by Beliavsky, which is, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's stopping bishop d8, so it's not 100% great, but it's not so bad either, because what the engines think is that what black's preparing here is to go rook d7, just cover that 7th rank, and then he's going to play bishop d8 round to a5. But that's really got to be the plan. You've got to get this bishop active somehow. Now, nobody plays it amazingly accurately there. Rook a6, the engines don't particularly think that was particularly important, but rook a6 attacks the bishop, stops black from playing g6 somehow. King f8, they absolutely hate the engines. It's plus 3.39 now. Can you believe that? Just in a couple of moves, Beliavsky's gone from just equal to totally lost, basically. Again, the engines just want rook d7, bishop d8. Really feel you've got to have that counterplay, or everything's going to the counterplay of the bishop coming to a5 to attack the pawn on c3, or everything's going wrong. But after king f8, yeah, knight g2 played by Mariotti, and the engines say, oh, no, not good. So it's interesting, the plan that Mariotti wants, actually. He wants to play the rook round e3 to f3, cover the c3 pawn, attack f7, and then either bring the knight round to e3 or to f4. It's a very nice plan. Really very nice plan, and quite unusual, I'm sure completely unexpected for Beliavsky. But the engines think you should just be playing rook a1 and just playing rook a5 and lining up on the pawn. And if you try and go to b3, I go to a3. I mean, I'm threatening rook b3 and rook b6. If you go rook d8, I've got knight takes d5, and yeah, otherwise rook b1, king g2, rook c1. I just check you, and yeah, I mean, rook c3, obviously there's knight takes d5, king d7, knight d5, and the engines think we'll make that somehow. I mean, the key, one of the key ideas is that you can go rook a3 and then eventually knight e3 and take the pawn on c4. So, the engines are just thinking, yeah, this is just over now. We can just focus, straight away on attacking the pawn on d5. And yeah, I mean, Mariotti was just much more subtle somehow. But I'm sure this was quite unpleasant for Beliavsky, because actually there's if you don't spot this idea of coming round to a5, then you've just got no counterplay at all. So bishop c3 played by Beliavsky, and rook b3 and rook e3, and yeah, and the engines again here saying we've got to get this dark squared bishop active. Bishop e7, bishop a3 is what we want, and we're coming around to b2. And this is going to be fine for black. You've managed to get your counterplay again. But yeah, Beliavsky played rook b1, a little bit aimless somehow, and king h2 was played, and the engines are back up to 2.61. You know, you're just Black's just not making any concrete progress there in what he wants to do, and obviously White's going to be able to defend everything very easily. So bishop e7 was played. I think Beliavsky was kind of looking to put the bishop to d6 to cover knight f4. Rook a7, not the best move. Knight f4 was the best move according to the engine. We're just going to line up on all these pawns, but it doesn't really matter. Still, you can just see really that things are just all going quite tricky somehow. So we've got the rook on f3, covering f2 and c3, and now the knight's attacking d5, and we line up with our knight and with our rook there. Bishop c7 from Beliavsky, and here, in actual fact, this is where, yeah, it's one of those things where, yeah, it doesn't quite go right, really, because Mariotti played the most natural move in the position, but funnily enough, it's not the best move at all. The engines really want to keep on playing the position. They want to play the rook back to a6, and we've got all sorts of threats, right? I mean, rook f5 is quite a big one, attacking the pawns on d5 and f5. And you know, if you play something like rook b5, for example, rook f5, I hit h5. I'm also threatening moves like knight takes c4 with the pin across there as well, or something like rook c6 takes c4, exploiting that pin. The black position is absolutely collapsing. The key thing is, though, it's taking that pawn on d5 at the right moment in the right way is quite important, because after rook takes d5, the engine suddenly scream, draw! So, because in actual fact, just, you know, by complete accident, it feels, Beliavsky has got his bishop on a5, attacking the knight on the pawn on c3. And it looks like White's got it completely covered. But actually, it's not really that clear, because after rook e3, what Beliavsky could have done simply was to go rook b5. And if knight f4, you come back to b3. Now, you can play, the engines repeat a little bit, you can play the knight round to e2. But actually, the engines just think that this sort of position is completely fine for black, and you can sort of see why. Yeah? If the king goes to f1, we go rook b1. If you start opening up the king side, and these pawns get weak, and if the knight moves away wherever, you can always just put the bishop back to a5 to attack c3. So, you know, obviously White's got the chances that are there, but in general terms, you just don't have enough to win this position for White. It's not to say that you couldn't try, and not to say that it might be rather tricky against Magnus, but you know, it's for the engines, it's 0.00. And yeah, Beliavsky played the move rook c1, which is still okay. Mariotti played king g2, but here was the real big error here, and yeah, it's quite a strange one really from Beliavsky really. I mean, I would have said presumably, you know, move 40 was approaching and time was short. I mean, I would have said that rook c2 is more or less the only move that you'd really consider in this position. I mean, you're attacking the pawn on f2 and you're keeping the attack on c3. I mean, you have to maybe make a slightly difficult decision afterwards. After king f3, the engines were actually looking at playing the move g5 here, which is quite something somehow. Yeah, I'm not quite sure really. I haven't really spent too much time analysing it. I will say that after king f1, the engines want to go rook b2 and then go rook b5 again somehow. You know, I mean, that's kind of the engines just really want to drive that knight from d5 and then come back and hit c3 again. But what Beliavsky did, king g8, was really, that was quite a bad blunder somehow, because the move rook e8 check followed. Beliavsky put his king on h7 and then rook c8, and just in two moves, you know, black's just lost all of his defensive structure, because we're just threatening rook takes c4 there. You know, of course, if you had the rook still on the b file, you could hit the knight on b5, you could try and do something somehow, But here it's just completely gone. Rook takes c4, white's going to be 2 pawns up, for example. So Beliavsky had to take the pawn on c3, but now we're exchanging off the rooks by force here somehow. And yeah, this is just going to be winning somehow. The kingside pawns are quite easy to attack for the knight, and this passed d pawn can be used as a decoy. As always, it's never trivial, never trivial, these things. f5 played to stop the pawn coming to e4, knight f4, g6. But when you've got this sort of structure somehow, yeah, I mean, you're always going to be tying something down. So the king's not going to be able to even get across the d file. So that's going to make this d pawn even more annoying. Indeed, that's what Mariotti did here. So knight e6, preparing to get the king in. King f4, king f7, king g5, bishop c1, check, that's fine, but now knight f4. We're attacking the pawn. The knight can come to d3 at some stage to defend the pawn on f2 if it needs to, and for the rest we're just throwing the pawn onto d6 there. So bishop e1, d7 was played, or bishop e1. I think that Beliavsky resigned somewhere around here. In actual fact, I've played a game between the engines from here, and they've gone on and on, but I don't think that's what happened. I think that Beliavsky pretty much resigned here. The point is, after d7, bishop a5, we just go knight g6. We just pick up both pawns basically. I mean, here the engine's just even saying, I don't even care about my f2 pawn. And this is just completely winning. Obviously, there's no such thing as bad rook's pawn with a knight or anything like that. So black's just got no chances at all. So there we are. Not the most spectacular game from Mariotti, but a very interesting one nonetheless. I mean, I thought the whole psychological situation and how things went wrong for Beliavsky and the improvements that the engines find throughout that ending, really, really interesting. And I mean, I can certainly think back to situations, where I've done the same as Beliavsky somehow. So I think it's a pretty. I'm convinced it's a pretty common psychological thing to happen. So, well, I mean, just seeing what the engine recommends, these very concrete ideas to, turn your passive-looking minor piece into an active piece. That's yeah, I think very, very good advice indeed. And I think also, though, if you're a Trompovsky player, then this can be a nice model game for the type of structure thing you'd like to have with, a knight against a dark squared bishop there, with a dark squared bishop unable to defend that central pawn chain on d5, c4 there. In particular, of course, the c4, the d5 pawn. So there we are. Hope you enjoyed that. Do stay tuned. I'm hoping to start up again slowly with more videos. Been a very busy time recently, but plenty of stuff in the pipeline, I hope. And yeah, thanks very much for watching, and hope to see you at the next videos. Thanks for watching.